Hello. At a time of unprecedented level of globalization, the coronavirus and our response to it is a sign of how interconnected and how interdependent we are on each other. We are all in this together, all countries, regions, religions, and nationalities. World leaders and politicians are telling us that this is the biggest crisis since the Second World War, and that in this battle, no one is to be left behind. But is this really the case? Are we not leaving anyone behind? Well, stories from across the globe tell us otherwise. There are many stories of the most vulnerable, the sick, the displaced, the elderly that are being left behind. As a multidisciplinary group, in our video, we've decided to tackle the question of the provision of healthcare to the elderly, who are arguably the most or among the most vulnerable groups at the time of the coronavirus, and how our response is, has, and will continue to be shaped by our culture, our economic system, and our understanding of medical facts and psychology.
The treatment of the elderly may reflect different cultural values. In Italy, the three-generation family is very valued. The elderly play an important role in rearing children, and bonds across generations are strong. This is often contrasted to Northern European countries such as the Netherlands, with a nuclear family and a more individualistic culture. For Italians, not being able to care for the elderly in the current coronavirus crisis is a tragedy. In the Dutch media, it's an inevitable part of the current crisis, and elderly are even asked whether they want intensive care or not. This is not about which attitude is best, as ethical choices have no easy answer. But it is important to see how the treatment of the elderly can reflect cultural differences.
The elderly have been identified as the most susceptible population in many studies, which is highly influenced by poor immune function and pre-existing health conditions of most patients in that age group. Heart disease, chronic respiratory illnesses, diabetes, hypertension, these and other comorbidities make them significantly less likely to recover. In the face of severe resource constraints, public health professionals are faced with the question of how to prioritize treatment. In explaining the rationale behind age limits and the exclusion of the elderly, medical professionals argue that, as painful as it is to admit, it's extremely unlikely for them to survive, and allocating resources to them means denying support to those who are otherwise healthy and would survive. They argue for, and I quote, clinical reasonableness and a utilitarian approach to guarantee that patients with the highest chance of therapeutic success retain access to intensive care.
Why is there inequality when it comes to treating patients? One psychological explanation gives the moral machine, which was developed with the help of algorithms. It found cultural differences in the prioritization of old and younger people, indicating that people in Western countries, including the Netherlands, tended to protect younger people over older people, while in Eastern countries the opposite was the case. South Korea, for example, is a model country when it comes to containing the coronavirus successfully, while at the same time taking care of its elder population. So these two things do not necessarily exclude each other. Nevertheless, in order to return to a normal state again, sooner or later there will be relaxations from the current measures, allowing low-risk groups to be released first, while the older population still need to be protected by isolating them. This, however, leads to additional threats for the older population, because it has been shown that loneliness not only favors psychological disorders like depression or anxiety, but also significantly weakens the immune system. Elderly people who already have pre-existing conditions and struggle with a weak immune system would thus be more likely to die from a COVID-19 infection than it is already the case.
Yes, the last point will be on the economy. We are told that money doesn't buy happiness. However, during these times, money might be able to buy us safety. Because of that, many countries have asked their citizens to stay at home, and they subsidized their stay at home. However, this unfortunately has not been the case everywhere. On the one hand, we see countries like the Netherlands, where everybody has been told to stay at home unless you have a job that requires you to be outside. And the government paid and prioritized the general health of the population. As opposed to another example, for example, in the US, where there have been voices calling on the elderly to go out and sacrifice on behalf of the younger generation in order to save the economy.
As you can see, the basis for inequality in the elderly during the current coronavirus crisis extends beyond one sphere of the society. It's not just a question of whether young lives are inherently worth more than old lives, and is definitely not a conclusion concerning the best approach. This situation highlights the difficulties faced by organizations, policymakers, outbreak response teams, and society as a whole while trying to address critical ethical issues in the face of an outbreak.